Go see Missy in the courtyard if you're a lady here at Canyon Hills, high school and up, or 18 and older. So go sign up for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's May 3rd and May 4th. So this last week, the waves were really big in Newport. I took my kids out to play in the sand, and even though it's freezing, they still like to put their feet in the water. But because the waves were so big, I'm watching the surfers, and in order to stay, like when you're surfing, there's kind of a sweet spot that you want to be in, right where the waves are breaking in a certain spot. But as the current is pushing them, in order for the guys to stay right in that sweet spot, they're basically spending their whole time between sets just paddling. And when they stop paddling, they're drifting, and then they're off of the sweet spot, so they start paddling again. And I'm just watching them get exhausted. And if you've ever been to the beach, you've probably experienced this, where you put your stuff down in the sand, you get out in the water, and then 15 minutes later, you're like way down here. Right? And it's just part of being in the water. It's just part of the ocean current. But as I was watching these surfers exhaust themselves just to stay in the same spot, I was thinking about this message and what we're going to be talking about, and this idea of drift. How oftentimes we find ourselves drifting further and further away from where we started. And today we're going to talk about the Passover. We're going to talk about the Lord's Supper. And the Passover was this yearly festival that the Jewish people would do, that they still do to this day, that was intended to root them and their identity as God's people. Because God knows that we have this tendency to drift. Subconsciously, unintentionally, over time, we just kind of get farther and farther from where we started. Some examples. A really good example is marriage. If you are married, think of when you were first married, what your relationship was like. Think about the excitement and the love and the passion. And over time, marriage changes. Over time, there's this drift that begins to develop. And it's something that happens to every marriage. It's something that happens to all of us, every relationship, where over time, things kind of just become a little different. There's where you started, and then the current will kind of push you, without you trying or even thinking about it, further and further apart. And if you're not intentional, if you're not fighting against that current, if you're not fighting against that drift, you end up really far apart. And a lot of people, I was just looking at the statistics this week, it's still 40 to 50% of marriages in the United States end up in divorce. And that's because this drift that we experience, it's inevitable. It's something that just happens. When you're out in the ocean, the current is going to be pulling you. And unless you're actively fighting against it in your marriage, you're going to end up really far apart. And there are things that you can do to be intentional about remaining close to one another. You can work on communication. You can work on being selfless. You can work on making time for one another. But if you're not working on this actively, then life gets really busy with work, and we get really focused on what our needs are and what we want, and we all get very selfish. And if we're not intentional, then we experience this drift in our marriages. And a lot of people, 40 to 50% of people, that drift becomes so much that they end up getting divorced. And it's not just marriages where we experience this drifting apart that happens naturally. It's other relationships. I was talking to a man this last week after church, and he was sharing that he hasn't talked to his adult son in over 6 years. And I did some research on this, and 27% of adult children right now have cut ties with one or more of their parents. 27% of adult children. And it's initiated oftentimes by the adult children. But we see this estrangement that happens between parents and their kids. Now, I look at my kids now, and I spend every minute with my kids. And most of the time, that's a good thing. Sometimes it's like, man. But I'm spending, I go to bed with my kids. I wake up with my kids. I'm with them all the time. And I can't imagine, it breaks my heart to think that one day we might be estranged. But 27% of adult children are cutting ties with one or more of their parents. How does this estrangement happen? How do we prevent ourselves from drifting? Because much like in the ocean, if we're just sitting there, it's just happening. And it happens slowly, and you don't even notice, but all of a sudden you look up and your stuff is a mile down the beach. We don't want that in our marriage. We don't want that with our kids. They have this saying, they say in your 20s, all your friends are getting married. And that was certainly a fun season in life, going to all my friends' weddings. And then they say in your 30s, all your friends are having kids. But unfortunately, there's this other thing that happens in your 30s where everyone's getting divorced. A lot of your friends in your 30s are going through divorces. And this has been something that's been really sad for me to watch. Some of my best friends, I've watched them go through pretty devastating divorces. And as I was kind of thinking through this, I noticed this common denominator I mean, these are good friends that I had that I would watch them go through this. And there was a common denominator with 3 guys in particular that I'm thinking of. And before they had this drift in their marriage, before they ended up really far from their spouse, there was a drift that happened spiritually first. And I saw it in each of these guys where something was going on where they had kind of drifted away from God. And eventually this led to estrangement between them and their spouse that ultimately led to divorce. And so when we talk today about this passage, when we talk about trying to anchor ourselves with God, I want to highlight the significance and the importance of our spiritual relationship and our ability to really to stay in the same spot, to stay in the place where God has called us. Because none of us go into marriage saying, man, I'm so excited for us drifting apart. I'm so excited to fall out of love with you. And yet 40 to 50%, it happens. And those are just the ones that end in divorce. Those aren't the ones who they fall out of love, but they stay together for the kids. None of us go into our relationships, none of us go into our faith with Jesus looking forward to when it gets cold. And yet it happens. So what can we be doing to actively fight against that? So we're going to be in Mark chapter 14, and we're going to start here in verse 12. And it says this: on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, where do you want us to go and make preparations to eat the Passover? So this is kind of setting the scene for the passage for us. This is going to happen in the context of this big Jewish festival. This is one of the biggest celebrations, one of the biggest festivals that the Jewish people would have, and still to this day, they still celebrate Passover. And it was this big elaborate thing where they'd kind of start, everyone would go to Jerusalem. This is back when everything was centralized in the temple. There's no temple anymore, and so no Passover isn't celebrated as centrally. But back then, because the temple was right there, everybody was expected to kind of make this pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to the capital city of Israel. And you'd all go there, all your friends were there, all your family members were there, and it was this happy, exciting time, and you'd start the celebration. It was multiple days. You'd start the celebration by clearing the house, and it was kind of like spring cleaning, but you're looking for any leaven. So a big part of this festival is they would eat the matzah, like crackers almost, and it was unleavened bread. And so this comes from the Exodus passage where the first Passover happens, but they would clear their house, and the closest thing that we have is something like Christmas or Easter, where we're in the United States. Like if during Christmas time, you know it's Christmas time because every store has Christmas music, every store has Christmas items for sale. Most of the houses you drive by are going to have Christmas lights. It's a big thing. And similarly with the Jewish people, Passover was this big thing. They'd start by clearing their houses of all leaven. All the family would come and stay, and then it would culminate with this big Passover meal. And this is kind of the setting in which our story is going to take place, this really exciting festive season. Now, if you remember, the last few weeks we've been talking about Jesus arriving here in Jerusalem. We've been talking about the anticipation and the crowds, and a big part of why there's so many people, and a big part of why it's such a powder keg of political turmoil is because of the Passover festival. Any other time of year, there wouldn't be as many people. Any other time of year, there wouldn't be such a spiritual and religious focus, and yet Jesus comes during the Passover festival. And so this is the setting, this is the scene in which Jesus is going to have what we call the Last Supper or the Lord's Supper. Now, typically, this would be a really exciting time. Very similar to Christmas when you get together for Christmas dinner with family. It's supposed to be fun and it's supposed to be exciting. And yet in the midst of this, Jesus is carrying this weight with him, this sadness. We read a few chapters ago when Jesus first arrives in Jerusalem, he looks over the city and he weeps. He's in tears. I came across this picture this week of, it's a picture of a birthday party inside the World Trade Center before 9/11. And if you can imagine, and I've seen videos. There's like a video of this birthday party, and this is a few weeks prior to the events in which the towers are going to fall. And you look at this, and when you look at a picture like this, you kind of feel the weight of what's going to happen. Like they're all happy and they're all exciting, but like if only they knew. And Jesus similarly is looking around this city during this Christmas time. During this festival, this excitement, and everyone's busy getting all their preparations, getting everything ready. And Jesus is looking at this, and he knows what's going to happen, though. The people have no idea the gravity in which they're living. It's not just the events of the Passion in which Jesus is going to be crucified. This isn't just a personal grievance that Jesus has. But Jesus knows that in a matter of years, the Romans are going to come and destroy this whole city. He knows that not a single one of these people is going to be unaffected by the bloody conquest that's coming. And so he kind of carries this sadness and he carries this weight with him. And it gets worse. It gets kind of even more of a downer. It says this in verse 17. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table, eating, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." Like, imagine being at Christmas dinner and Grandpa stands up and he's like, "Hey, I know some of you, I know one of you has been stealing $30,000 from me. Can someone hand me the mashed potatoes?" Like, that's like, Jesus, like, he kind of just drops this bomb on them. He's like, hey, one of you is going to betray me. Now, this is a big deal because they've been doing this together. They've been really traveling together, doing ministry together for 3 years. These people have given up their lives to be with Jesus, to follow Jesus. And then Jesus says, one of you. I mean, these guys are best friends. One of you who've been spending every day of your life for the last 3 years with me. One of you is going to betray the rest of us. That's heavy. And it continues, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They were saddened. And one by one they said to him, "Surely you don't mean me." "It is one of the 12, he replied, "one who dips bread into the bowl with me." So you have Jesus kind of drop this bomb on them. And sometimes we kind of read through passages and we don't always place ourselves kind of in these situations, but just imagine being one of the disciples. You know, think of like your high school friends, like people you spent 4 years day in and day out with, but then like amplify that because these people are like camping together. These people are closer than brothers, and then Jesus says one of you is going to betray all the rest of us. And that must have been devastating. Now, as you read on in this story, you're going to see that not only will Judas betray Jesus, but the rest of the disciples are going to abandon Jesus. Now, when I read this, I have to ask myself, what would drive not only Judas to betray Jesus, but what would drive the rest of the disciples to abandon him? How does this happen? Right before this, Peter is telling Jesus, "I will never abandon you. I would die for you, Jesus." And I believe he means it. So what happens? What gets Peter or Jesus to the point where they are willing to die, where they're saying, "I'm willing to die," and yet the next minute they're all going to abandon him, and one of them is just going to outright betray him? Now, Judas, I don't think it was all about money for him. I don't think, sometimes we kind of write Judas off. You're like, well, he just got greedy. Because we know that he was paid 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus. But I don't think that was the driving motivation. That may have been a sweetener, that may have pushed him over the edge, but that wasn't it. That's not why he betrayed Jesus. There's something happens here where when the disciples choose to follow Jesus, Jesus goes up to each one of them individually. He selects his disciples. And he says, "Follow me." And in that moment, when Jesus goes up to one of the disciples and says, "Follow me," it's this really pivotal moment in the lives of the disciples. It's going to alter the trajectory of their lives. And in that moment, when Jesus comes up to them and says, "Follow me," they have ideas of what this is going to look like. Judas, Peter, John, James, all of them. When Jesus shows up and says, "Follow me," they say yes, and they say yes for a reason. Because they are excited about what Jesus might do, and they're excited to participate in that. But they have expectations for what their life will look like. They think that it's going a certain direction. Now, over time, what they expect from Jesus is going to drift pretty far from what Jesus is actually going to do. There's going to be a distance that develops between these two. They think Jesus is going to do one thing, but in reality, Jesus is doing something else. And so there's this gap that kind of continues to widen. At first, they don't quite notice how big of a difference it is, but over time, they realize, okay, Jesus isn't even close to who I thought he was. They all had expectations of what Jesus was going to do and who he was, and they were all wrong. And when we get in this position where the reality is different from our expectations, that's when our loyalty is tested. That's when our faithfulness and our commitment is tested. Think about when you got married, if you're married. When you got married, we all say, we probably all said the same thing, right? Like for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, there's kind of like these universal vows that everyone seems to do. And we all say that, but the reality is a lot of people don't mean it. Right, when I got married, I had this idea of what my marriage would look like, and I wasn't hoping to be poor with my wife. I wasn't hoping to be sick with my wife, right? Even though we say for rich or for poor in sickness and in health, we really don't know where things are going. And we don't know the person our spouse is going to become. And so when we get married, when you say yes to that, you're committing to your spouse, but you really don't know who they're going to be in 10 years. We can't. You can't predict how much someone's going to change and mature and become a new and hopefully better person, but you just don't know. And so we say, hey, I'm committing to you, but clearly by the statistics, a lot of people don't really mean that. Because as their spouse changes, as their situation changes, they say, hey, I told you for rich or for poor, for sickness and health, but I didn't really mean it. And that's the reality for a lot of people. Because they're in love with the person they're with, but then over time that person changes, and then their commitment comes into question. And we see that with the disciples. The disciples expected Jesus to be this local political revolutionary. They had in their minds who Jesus should be. And similarly, when we're getting married, we like the person we're with. And we're not necessarily hoping or expecting that to change, but we all change. And we have to make peace with the fact that over time, things are different. Your marriage is not the same now as it was when you had kids. Now, hopefully, as you grow and develop together, your marriage becomes stronger and it becomes better. But that takes work and that takes intentionality. And a lot of people aren't willing to put that work and that effort in. And we see with the disciples, as they see that Jesus is kind of going a different direction than they expect, a lot of them, Judas specifically first, says, I can't do this. I'm out. A lot of people, when they're getting divorced, they say, you're not the person I married. What do we do when God begins to move a direction that we are not expecting? One thing we have to understand, this is really important, is Jesus is not going to do what you expect him to do. He's not. The disciples were with Jesus for 3 years of their life. They got to hear all of his teachings. They got to see all of his miracles, and yet they couldn't see where he was going. They couldn't understand. Their expectations were so far off from what he was actually doing. When you became a Christian, you kind of have expectations of what Jesus is going to do with your life. He's going to bless me. He's going to give me peace. He's going to protect me. He's going to guide me. He's going to open up doors for me. We have these expectations and these hopes for what our relationship with Jesus is going to look like. But we're all wrong. We're all wrong. We can guess. We can hope that Jesus is going to do X, Y, and Z, but in reality, we can't see where Jesus is going to take us. The disciples couldn't see it, and similarly, when we say yes to Jesus, we can't see exactly where he's going. And so there comes a moment when where he's leading us is different from where we expected. And typically this is when he calls us to make a sacrifice. And this is where the disciples really began to waver. When they realized, okay, Jesus isn't going to do the political changes and the local revolution I was expecting. Instead, Jesus is calling me to make a sacrifice. They're like, well, I don't know about this. And a lot of Christians, they say yes to Jesus, and they have expectations for what their life is going to look like, and they're excited. I want his blessings. I want prosperity. I want happiness. I want him to fix all these broken relationships. And we have high hopes for what Jesus is going to do. And he will do a lot of those things. But what catches us off guard and what catches the disciples off guard is Jesus is doing amazing things, but then he has this great call to sacrifice. And he does this with us. And many Christians, they're happy to follow Jesus, but then all of a sudden he says, I need you to give this up. Or he says, I need you to make this change. I need you to make this sacrifice. And a lot of Christians will say, whoa, God, I thought you were supposed to make my life better. That's going to make my life worse. That's giving up too much, Jesus. And you have these situations in which I believe many Christians are in this position where they were following Jesus up until it got really hard. Up until he asked a little bit too much for them. Up until where he was leading didn't line up with where they were expecting him and hoping that he would go. And then you have this moment where a lot of people stop following Jesus. Now, I don't think that they would say as much. I think they'd say, I'm still a Christian. They still go to church. They still try and read their Bible. They still try and act and think like a Christian. But the reality is they stopped following Jesus. And some of you might be in that position where you said yes to Jesus. You're like, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. I'm excited to follow you. I'm excited for the life that you have in store. I'm excited for the promises that you offer me. I'm going to heaven. But then he calls you to make a sacrifice. And then you pause. And a lot of people will say, well, surely Jesus wouldn't do that. He wouldn't want me to make that choice. He wouldn't want me to give this up. He wouldn't want me to distance myself from that group of people. And we explain it away. We say, well, Jesus wouldn't call me to that. And then we stop following him. We still call ourselves Christians. We still go to church, but we stop following Jesus. I think there are many Christians that are in that spot where God asked something of them. God called them to make a sacrifice. And they said no. What's the last thing God called you to do? It's one of my favorite questions to ask people when they're feeling stuck in their faith, because oftentimes that's where our relationship with God kind of left off. When he said, I want you to do this. And we said, no, I can't do that. And then time goes on and we're like, man, where is God? He's right where you left him. And so some of you this morning, maybe we need to go back there. And what was the last thing God called you to do? Yeah, it probably scared you. Yeah, it probably doesn't make sense. There are reasons why you didn't do it. There are reasons why you explained it the way God wouldn't call me to do that. But what's the last thing God called you to do? Our call as Christians is a call to sacrifice. Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me. I want the good stuff. I want the blessings and the prosperity. I want the peace that God offers. I want the hope that God offers. But we have to understand that the ultimate call, especially while we're here on this earth, this temporary, this short life, our ultimate call is a call of sacrifice. God will call us to make sacrifices. And it's not going to make sense in the short term always. It's going to be painful in the short term. But I can guarantee you that when we say yes to what God is calling us to do, what he's calling us to give up, where he's calling us to go, no matter how scary, no matter how painful, it will always come through in the long run. Always. Now the disciples are wrestling with this, and Judas ultimately kind of gets stuck there and is going to betray Jesus. But before that, Jesus continues on with this Last Supper, and he says this in 22. While they were eating, Jesus took bread. And again, this is not like bread that like we have, it's not the sourdough that your wife is making at home. This is like, it's matzah. It's like a cracker. It's similar to a saltine. And so he takes bread and he breaks it. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take it. This is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many, he said to them. Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God. Then they had sung a hymn, and they went out to the Mount of Olives. So the disciples are observing this Passover event, this Passover meal. And this is something that the Jewish people, they still do to this day. They've been doing it for 1,000 years when we read about it here. And the reason that they do it, the reason they're so particular about the way that they do it, if you're familiar with the Passover Seder, there's like a whole order to this. The reason they're so particular is because in the book of Exodus, when we read about the original Passover, when God frees them from Egypt, part of it is God commanding them, I want you to celebrate a meal commemorating this event every year. And God's very particular with how he wants them to do it. But every year he commands them celebrate the Passover meal. And the reason he calls them to do it is because he wants them to remember who they are. And who they are is a people that have been saved by God from slavery for a purpose. God didn't save Israel so they can go build their nice big country and be happy and prosperous and peaceful. But so easily, the Israelites will be freed from slavery and then focus on their kingdom and what they want. So quickly they drift from the identity that God gave them as his chosen people for his chosen purpose. Similarly, as Christians, God will step into your life and save you. God will show up in a powerful way, pull you out of slavery, pull you out of situations you were stuck in. And he'll save you. And then with that, it's so easy for us to be, thank you, God, for heaven. Now help me buy my second house. God, thank you for saving me. I'm going to go do my own thing. We drift from our original purpose and our identity as being saved for a specific reason. God saved you because he wants to use you to redeem those around you. Israel is part of this covenant that God made with Abraham, to bless Abraham, but then more than that, to bless the world. And this is going to come through Jesus. But the Israelites were saved so they could bless the world. You and I were saved so that we could participate in the redemption of the world. The Jewish people have their Passover to root them in that identity, to remind them every year that they were saved for a purpose. Similarly, we have traditions that are intended to root us in our Christian identity as people who are saved for a purpose. Now, in response, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to do communion today. And communion at the end during the song, during the response song, I want to invite you. We have a table in the front and then 2 tables in the back corners. And communion, it's also called the Eucharist. It's something that we do. It's kind of a Christian tradition that's been around really since the beginning, the very first church when Jesus died. Communion, the practice of the wine and the cracker, we have juice here, is intended to root us in our Christian identity, to remind us that we were purchased for a price and purchased for a reason. There's the cracker and there's the juice, and the cracker represents God's body breaking for us on the cross. And the juice represents God's blood, which isn't just his blood pouring out like he died. That's part of it. That's an important part. But also the blood of the new covenant. Blood was used to make deals back then. And God made a deal with us. A really good deal in which we get to go to heaven. And it costs us nothing. And this blood represents this deal, but part of this deal is this expectation, this desire that we would participate in extending that deal to others. And so that's the second thing I want to do. So we're going to do communion during this response song, but I also want to invite you to participate with me in the redemption of others. We have Easter coming up, and in Easter, we are hoping to fill this place with people who are questioning their faith, people who either aren't Christians or considering being Christians. And it's our desire that each one of us, that you and that me, would be thinking about who we might bring. Someone that we know, or maybe a family member or a friend or a coworker, who we might bring that could use the gospel. Now, it might be someone who we know will say no, but God may be nudging us to ask that person anyways. But part of what we're going to do for Easter is we're going to fill this place with people who haven't heard the gospel. And then here's where you come in, aside from the invitation. I want to invite you to join us, and we're going to do testimonies. And they're not going to be spoken testimonies. You're not going to say anything. But we're going to have these signs, these posters. And if you've seen this before, it's been called cardboard testimonies. But basically, I brought a blank poster. But on one side of the poster, it will have where you were before Jesus, where you were at a low point. It might say something like, working myself to death, finding my identity in my work. And then you'll flip that around, and you'll invite them to mops. No, I'm just kidding. You'll flip it around, and it will say what God did. It will say something like my identity is no longer in my work. I have a new purpose. Or it will say, no longer a slave to alcohol, 10 years sober. And you're not going to say anything. You're just going to walk up with your sign, and we're going to print the signs. We're going to help you put the wording together. And you'll walk up with where you were, and then you'll flip it over to where God is leading you. And there's going to be someone out there who's struggling with alcohol. They're going to be struggling with their identity in Jesus. They're going to be struggling with that very thing that you were stuck in. And they're going to see you flip your sign over. And some of them may not know you. Some of them may have been going to church with you for a while, and they're going to see that. They're going to say, man, that lady was on the brink of divorce. She's so happy with her relationship. And for the first time in years, they're going to have hope for their marriage because you had the courage to share your story. And so I want to invite you to be praying about this right now. We're going to do communion, but I want to invite you to be praying about this today. Not like I'll think about it, but like think about it today, like right now. Would you participate with us this Easter in allowing God to use your story in the redemption of others? Who are you going to bring to see the transformation that God has been doing here at Canyon Hills? And would you consider sharing your story with us? The building block today is tradition. And we have these traditions like the communion, like worship, to root us in who we are as Christians. But we also have these traditions to remind us of where we're going. And where we're going is a good place, especially when you look at where we were, especially when you look at where we were stuck. And let's offer that hope and that excitement and that freedom to the people around us. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you for your Son. We thank you for his sacrifice. God, we thank you for the work that you have done in transforming our lives. Lord, for those of us who may be stuck still, who are longing and yearning for that transformation, Lord, meet us here in this moment and give us clarity on that next step. God, what is it that you are calling us to do? What is it you are asking of us? Help us to find freedom. God, give us that next step and give us the courage to follow through. Lord, as we remember in this time of communion your sacrifice, as we remember your Son, and as we look forward to what he calls us to, let us feel your presence this morning. Lord, I pray that over each person as we participate in this tradition of communion, let us feel your presence. Let it motivate us to be powerful tools in your kingdom. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
During this time, you guys can partake in communion with us.
Everything changed. It's getting harder to recognize the person I was before I encountered Christ. I don't walk like I used to. I don't talk like I used to. I've been washed from the inside. I've been washed from the inside out. Hallelujah, hallelujah. I know it was the blood. It could have only been the blood. Hallelujah, hallelujah. I know it was the blood. It could have only been the I cannot explain, but nothing more real than this. In the presence of God, but what my heart experienced, when my shame hit the wayside, and my sin met the Most High, I was washed from the inside. I was washed from the inside. Hallelujah, hallelujah. I know it was the blood. It could have only been the blood. Hallelujah, hallelujah. I know it was the blood. It could have only been the blood. It's only by your blood. I know it was the blood. It's never been about performance, perfection, or striving for acceptance. Let me tell you, it's only by the blood. It's never been about deserving or earning. It's a gift that's freely given. Let me tell you, it's only by the blood. Does anybody want to be holy, righteous, purified and spotless? Let me tell you, it's only by the blood. Does anybody want to be worthy, forgiven, justified, really living? Let me tell you, it's only by the blood. Hallelujah, hallelujah. I know it was the blood. It could have